April 8, 1994, Seattle police discover Kurt Cobain's body at his Lake Washington home. He was 27 years old. But this wasn't just another tragic loss in music history. It was the moment when a dark pattern that had existed for decades finally entered mainstream consciousness. What would later be called the 27 Club had been quietly claiming music's brightest stars for over half a century. But why 27? And how did one number become synonymous with artistic brilliance cut short? The story begins long before grunge, long before Nirvana. In 1938, a blues musician named Robert Johnson died in Mississippi at age 27. His death was mysterious, his talent legendary. Johnson had supposedly sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads for his extraordinary guitar skills. Whether you believe that story or not, his influence on rock music was undeniable, but it was just the beginning. Fast forward to 1969 to 1971. Within just 2 years, 4 of rock's most influential figures all died at exactly the same age. Brian Jones, the founding member of the Rolling Stones, was found dead in his swimming pool in July 1969. Officially ruled death by misadventure, questions about his final moments persist to this day. Then came Jimi Hendrix in September 1970. The guitar virtuoso who redefined what the instrument could do, found dead in a London apartment from an overdose of barbiturates. His girlfriend at the time claimed he had taken 9 German sleeping pills, 18 times the recommended dose. 4 months later, Janis Joplin, the raw-voiced queen of blues rock, was discovered in her Hollywood hotel room. She had injected what she thought was heroin, but was actually a much more potent mixture that killed several other users that same weekend. She was alone when she died, clutching $4.50 to buy cigarettes. The pattern seemed complete when Jim Morrison of The Doors died in Paris in July 1971. No autopsy was performed, but the official cause was listed as heart failure. His girlfriend found him in the bathtub of their apartment. Like the others, he was exactly 27 years old. The coincidence was noted by music journalists, but it remained more of a tragic footnote than a cultural phenomenon. That would change with Kurt Cobain. The pressure was building towards something that would make Kurt's name inseparable from the 27 Club. But what was it about this specific age that seemed to mark such a dangerous transition for artists? The death seemed too precise to be coincidental. Between the late 1960s and early 1970s, more members joined this unwitting club. Alan Blind Owl Wilson of Canned Heat died in September 1970, just 1 day after Hendrix. Ron Pigpen McKernan, founding member of the Grateful Dead, died in March 1973 from complications related to alcohol abuse. Both were 27. The pattern wasn't limited to rock musicians. Alexander Levy, a Brazilian composer and pianist, had died at 27 back in 1892. Louis Chauvin, a ragtime musician, died at 27 in 1908. The number seemed to transcend genres, decades, and even centuries. According to developmental psychology, the mid-20s represent a critical period. The brain has fully developed, creative identity is forming, but the pressures of early success can create a perfect storm. It's the age when many artists achieve their first major breakthrough, but also when the reality of fame collides with their artistic vision. For musicians like Kurt Cobain, 27 represented the collision between artistic authenticity and commercial demands. Nirvana's success with Nevermind catapulted him from underground punk to global spokesperson for a generation, a role he never wanted. He once said, "I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I'm not." Former Nirvana manager Danny Goldberg described the weight on Kurt's shoulders. He felt responsible for representing something bigger than himself, and that burden was crushing. But Kurt wasn't the only one struggling. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw the emergence of other troubled artists who would eventually join the 27 Club. Jean-Michel Basquiat, the neo-expressionist artist who had also been a musician in the band Grey, died of a heroin overdose in August 1988. His rise in the New York art scene had been meteoric, but fame proved difficult to handle, that received little understanding or proper treatment at the time. He had suffered from an undiagnosed stomach condition for years, leading him to self-medicate with various substances. The Seattle grunge scene, while supportive in many ways, was also dealing with its own demons. Drug use was rampant, and the scene that had nurtured Kurt's early development was now struggling with its own success. Many of his contemporaries were battling similar issues with addiction and mental health. But the pattern of the 27 Club wasn't finished claiming victims. In June 1994, just 2 months after Kurt's death, Kristen Pfaff, the bassist for Courtney Love's band Hole, died of a heroin overdose in Seattle. She was also 27. Making her the third member of the Seattle music community to die at that age within a year. These industry factors would prove to be the final elements in a tragic equation. The final months revealed the human cost of fame without support systems. Kurt's Rome incident in March 1994 was initially reported as an accident, but it represented a serious suicide attempt. He had been scheduled to enter rehabilitation immediately after the incident, but the stigma surrounding mental health treatment made the process complex and difficult. Friends and family recognized the warning signs. His mother, Wendy O'Connor, had been advocating for interventions. The music industry of the early 1990s was particularly brutal. The transition from independent labels to major corporate deals often left artists feeling like products rather than people. Suddenly, musicians who had spent years perfecting their craft in small venues found themselves under massive corporate pressure to produce hits and maintain an image. For Kurt, these pressures were amplified by his existing struggles with chronic pain and depression. Conditions, music industry colleagues noticed his increasing isolation. Band members Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl later spoke about feeling helpless as they watched their friends struggle. What made Kurt's situation particularly tragic was that help was available, but the stigma surrounding mental health in the 1990s made it difficult to access or accept. The concept of therapy for rock stars was virtually non-existent, and admitting to mental health struggles was seen as a sign of weakness rather than a call for help. The entertainment industry of that era perpetuated a culture where substance abuse and self-destructive behavior were often romanticized. The idea of the tortured artist was so embedded in rock culture that seeking help was almost seen as selling out or losing one's creative edge. Kurt's final days were marked by increasing paranoia and isolation. He had left a rehabilitation facility in Los Angeles and returned to Seattle, where he spent his last week largely alone in his Lake Washington home. The house, which should have been a sanctuary, became a place of isolation. The gap between private suffering and public success had become unbridgeable. When news of Kurt's death broke on April 8, 1994, his mother made a statement that would define how we understand the 27 Club. "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club." Her words crystallized what many had only whispered about, that there was something uniquely dangerous about being 27 in the music world. The phrase, "that stupid club," became shorthand for the 27 Club, and suddenly, a pattern that had existed for decades became part of mainstream culture. The media coverage of Kurt's death brought unprecedented attention to the 27 Club phenomenon. For the first time, journalists began seriously examining whether this was mere coincidence or something more sinister. Rock fans started connecting dots that had been invisible for decades. But Kurt's death also marked a turning point. The public conversation about mental health in the entertainment industry began to change. Suicide prevention resources became more visible at concerts and in music venues. Crisis helplines started being printed on album covers and concert tickets. Music magazines began featuring articles about mental health alongside their album reviews. The industry slowly began to recognize that the romantic notion of the tortured artist was actually a dangerous myth that needed to be dismantled. The 27 Club became less about mystical curses and more about recognizing the real-world factors that put young artists at risk. Years later, other musicians would continue to join the 27 Club, keeping the pattern alive in public consciousness. Amy Winehouse, the British jazz and soul singer, died in July 2011 from alcohol poisoning. Her struggles with addiction had been publicly documented, but the resources that might have helped her weren't adequately accessible or effective. Amy's death reignited global discussion about the 27 Club. Unlike the cluster of deaths in the early 1970s, hers was isolated by nearly 2 decades from Kurt's, suggesting that the pattern might be more about the pressures of young fame than any supernatural phenomenon. Before Amy, there had been other, lesser-known but equally tragic additions to the club. Dee Boone of the Minutemen died in a van crash in 1985. Jeremy Michael Ward of the Mars Volta died of a heroin overdose in 2003. Each death reinforced the pattern while highlighting different aspects of the music industry's dangers. The statistical reality is sobering. While research has shown that musicians aren't actually more likely to die at 27 than at other ages, the prominence of those who do creates a powerful cultural myth. The quality and influence of the artists who died at 27, from Robert Johnson to Amy Winehouse, has given the age a significance that transcends mere numbers. Today, artists like Adele, Ed Sheeran, and Taylor Swift have all passed 27 while maintaining their careers and well-being. The difference? Better support systems, mental health awareness, and industry practices that prioritize artist welfare. Record labels now often provide mental health resources as part of their artist development programs. The conversation that began with Kurt's death has evolved into concrete action. Organizations like Music Cares provide emergency financial assistance and addiction recovery resources for musicians. The conversation around mental health in entertainment has become normalized rather than stigmatized. Modern artists are more likely to speak openly about their struggles. Musicians like Logic, Macklemore, and Demi Lovato have built platforms around mental health awareness, using their fame to promote help-seeking behavior rather than hiding their struggles. The 27 Club phenomenon teaches us that talent and success don't protect against mental health struggles, but it also shows us that with proper support, these tragedies are preventable. The pattern that claimed so many brilliant minds has become a catalyst for change. The music industry has learned to recognize warning signs earlier. Tour schedules now build in mental health breaks. Artists have access to therapists and counselors. The romantic notion of the self-destructive artist is slowly being replaced by a more realistic understanding of creativity and well-being. Kurt Cobain's legacy isn't just his music. It's the conversation his death started about treating artists as human beings first and commodities second. The grunge movement he helped create was about authenticity and emotional honesty, values that now extend to how the industry treats mental health. The 27 Club may have started as a coincidence, but it became a wake-up call. Every time we lose an artist to suicide, we're reminded that behind the music are real people facing real struggles. The difference now is that we're better equipped to help them. The pattern still exists. There will likely always be artists who struggle with the pressures of fame and creativity. But the industry's response has fundamentally changed. Where once there was silence and stigma, there's now conversation and support. The members of the 27 Club didn't die in vain if their deaths helped create a safer environment for the artists who came after them. Their music lives on, but so does the awareness their tragic ends helped create. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, help is available. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 988, because no song is worth a life, and no art is worth an artist's suffering in silence.